Hello, my name is Michaela Kelly and I'm a junior here at Marist College. As a psychology and special education major, I'm currently enrolled in Dr. Beanfolk's Reading 2 class. I'm going to begin my story by telling you a little bit about myself. Ever since a young age, I've aspired to help those in need. My desire to make the world a better place for all individuals inspired me to volunteer at a camp for individuals with special needs. Camp Anchor is a place like no other. Here, the campers are not judgmental. They are carefree, simple, and appreciative of small favors. They make the most of what they have and ask for only love, encouragement, and patience in return. These individuals have shared with me that happiness can be found in the most unlikely of places. It is my campers who have encouraged me to become the best person I can be, and so I decided that the only way to do so is by becoming their teacher. I chose to develop my project on the second grade topic of American symbols. This topic teaches students about the symbols that represent their country as well as requires them to reflect upon the values that they hold dear to their hearts. Additionally, students are guided to the realization that although each individual is unique, we all believe in symbols that are important to us. In my social studies lesson, the students will be reading a short informational book about American symbols while thinking, what do I already know about the topic? The students will make connections between the text and their prior knowledge in order to comprehend the material. At the conclusion of the lesson, the students will examine a symbol that is important to them, draw a picture of it, and indicate what it means to them. The ELA standard I chose to work with is, by the end of the year, read and comprehend informational text. Second graders are beginning readers. For this reason, many face difficulty when it comes to decoding informational text. Informational texts often contain content-specific language that young students have not yet been exposed to. The purpose of this lesson was to provide the students with the reading strategy of connecting the text to their prior knowledge. Initially, while creating this lesson, I struggled to understand how to teach literacy skills and social studies simultaneously. However, I quickly realized that lecturing students about American symbols does not suffice as a lesson. Instead, a social studies lesson should empower students to take control of their learning, and the only way to do so is by teaching students how to make meaningful connections on their own. In my reading lesson, students will be reading two short informational books about an American symbol that they choose. By identifying two main points from each book and comparing and contrasting their findings on a graphic organizer, the students will comprehend the text as well as understand that people often view the same topic in different ways. At the conclusion of this lesson, students will create a poem, song, or rap, identifying the similarities and differences between the American symbol that they selected and a symbol from a different culture. The ELA standard I chose is compare and contrast the most important ideas presented by two texts on the same topic. Some second graders face difficulty when it comes to recognizing the similarities and differences between the main ideas of two books on the same topic. Therefore, the purpose of this lesson was to provide the students with an opportunity to practice their reading skill of comparing and contrasting main ideas presented in two texts on the same social studies topic. My biggest challenge in creating my reading lesson was incorporating the components of transparent teaching into the procedure section. However, fortunately, I was able to clarify my understanding. During the active engagement portion of this lesson, students will practice what the teacher modeled. During the independent work portion of this lesson, students will practice this skill in a new context. In my writing lesson, the students will develop an opinion regarding their favorite American symbol. They will develop two strong statements that support their opinion. When the lesson is complete, students will understand that opinion statements need reasons to support them. This is because in order to explain why we believe something, we must be able to explain the reasons why we believe it. The writing standard I chose to work with is write opinion pieces in which they introduce the topic or book they are writing about, state an opinion, supply reasons that support the opinion, and use linkage words. I decided to break this process up into smaller pieces. First, the students will develop an opinion. Then they will use text to help them develop strong supporting statements. Finally, they will incorporate linking words such as because, and also. The first draft of my writing lesson was a mess. I struggled to conjure up a writing activity that was appropriate for second graders to complete as they are only beginning to work on their writing skills. However, I soon realized that the students must be guided step by step, and so for my activity, students will use an organizer to develop an opinion on a topic as well as two strong supporting statements. In my math lesson, the students will be reading mathematical addition and subtraction problems closely. They will do so by underlining or circling complex mathematical terms in the text and by asking themselves questions about the problem at hand. As an extension to the students' learning, the teacher will have the students create their own math word problem about a cultural symbol and then illustrate it. In the second grade, students can add and subtract numbers within 100. However, when completing word problems, students often struggle to decipher what the problem is asking them. In order to address this issue, I decided to teach to the ELI standard, determine the meaning of words and phrases in a text relevant to grade 2 topic or subject area. By teaching the students to read closely and break down complex mathematical terms, the students can decipher what the text is asking in order to solve the problem at hand. When planning my math lesson, I was originally perplexed with how to incorporate my social studies theme into a mathematics lesson. However, I decided that by developing word problems in the context of American symbols, students could practice reading math problems closely as well as learn a little bit of information about American symbols. In my science lesson, the students will be reading a nonfiction scientific text about matter closely. They will use the process of predicting, clarifying, questioning, and summarizing the material at hand in order to inform deep and meaningful comprehension. As an extension activity, the students will illustrate their own symbol. They will be required to note the materials that compose their symbol and the properties. I chose to develop my science lesson around structures and property of matter. Since scientific texts often require a wealth of background knowledge pertaining to the topic as well as word decoding skills, I created a lesson in which students will be applying close reading strategies to a scientific informational text pertaining to matter. They will follow a series of steps while reading that will assist them in comprehending the material at hand. Similar to my math lesson, while planning my science lesson, I thought to myself, how in the world am I going to incorporate social studies into a science lesson? However, after reading through the standards, I realized that both science and social studies could often be embedded into all content areas. And so I developed an extension activity that requires students to apply what they are learning about in science to the topic of American symbols. Overall, as you can see from my illustration here, the process of developing a 5-lesson themed unit definitely had its ups and downs. When I finally perfected a lesson, I felt ecstatic, on top of the world. Yet when my lessons failed, I felt despair. However, I did learn through this process that it takes time and effort to develop meaningful lesson plans, a lesson that I will carry with me into my future career. That's all, folks. Thanks for bearing with me.